Hi, I'm Milena. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to my August reading wrap up. My main priority in August was first to do the magical readathon and secondly to just read a lot of fun books. So I have not finished any book club reads, but I have mood read a lot. Of course I did make a TBR board and I've read most of the books that I discussed on there, but I have these four and I have a lot of audiobooks and ebooks that I read. Mere minutes ago, it is the 30th of August today, I finished a fantasy duology. This is The Elements of Cadence by Rebecca Ross. First book is called A River Enchanted and the second book is called A Fire Endless. I read them back to back because it was kind of a magical readathon prompt. I was so pleasantly surprised by this. Not that I didn't think I would love it, but I'm still getting into understanding what I love when I'm reading fantasy. So this is set in a fictional island in Scotland, and this island is divided because 200 years ago there was a marriage between the two halves of the island and that didn't go well. So on this island we have the East and the West. The first book is very much about the East and we follow Dira, who is the heiress of the East. She becomes friends again with one of her childhood friends called Jack. He is a bard and he plays music and that is somehow interwoven with magic. A lot of crafts and creative things in this series are connected to magic, but if you live in the East, magic makes you very sick, and if you live in the West, it's really hard to get food. So that is kind of the curse that is on the island, and this series is about how all these spirits connected to the elements are influencing the people on the island. So we have of course the fire, the water, the wind and the earth spirits. This felt a bit reminiscent of Juliette Marillier, but the writing is very different. Rebecca Ross's writing is much more lyrical than Juliette Marillier. It feels way more like historical fiction. It's incredibly slow, focused on the characters, even though you do have an issue, a problem that needs to be solved in both of the books. I just really enjoyed this. This is a typical 4-star fantasy series for me, where I don't think it was so addictive and that I love it so much that it's a 5-star, but basically everything about the book I enjoyed. I think if you're going to read this, then you should anticipate also reading the second one, because the first one ends on a note that you just want to keep on reading. The characters and the romances may have been my favorite, although I did really like the music and the nature and the spirits elements, so the fantasy element. I really read it for the main romance and a subplot romance and a subplot romance. There's a subplot romance that has a very small role, but it's so beautiful and it matters a lot for the characters. I would definitely recommend this if you like a slower fantasy series. Then a fantasy series that I unfortunately did not enjoy that much, but that is Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I read this early in August, and somehow a lot of books that I read early in August were about a human woman and a not very human man having a romance. I think it's called like monster romance, but this is more demon god romance. Didn't really seek it out, but it kind of just happened. This is a historical fantasy set in the 1920s in Mexico, and we follow our main character who kind of has a Cinderella arc, which I really found very captivating early in the book. But instead of the prince, we have the god of death, who she accidentally awakens, and when she awakens him, he somehow possesses her in a way, and she has to help him regain his power because he has been locked in her grandfather's house. And they go on this journey together. I don't know why, because it sounds very fascinating, and the first 50 pages of this book I really liked, but I was really bored for the rest of it. I could not care about the characters, I could not care about their journey, I just could not understand why everything was happening and why I was supposed to be invested. I think it's the writing that just really didn't work for me. I do really like the concept of the story, and there's a lot of Maya myth in this book as well, which is something that I would find very fascinating in a book that I would enjoy more. I think with that was kind of the fact that the god of death, he really didn't have much of a character. I felt like he was very generic, very bland. He didn't have any characteristics. Cassiopeia, who is our main character, and her family were very interesting, and I think I would have enjoyed this book more if it was set at their family home, which the parts that played out there were my favorites. And I just think when she was with the god of death, because he had zero personality that I could distill from this book, I just found it quite boring, but I also didn't hate reading it, which is very conflicting, so I think it's gonna be a low 3-star. Another book with a similar presence that I read is That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon by Kimberly Lemming, which is the first fantasy romance I read, and I think, or I'm predicting, that when I'm reading fantasy romance, it's really going to be the cozy romances that I love. I don't think I would love the dark romances, so this cover very much screamed cozy romance to me. In a way, this was, in setting and the way the story was set up, kind of what I wanted Legends and Lattes to be. So that was fun, but it's definitely very, very different because kind of out of nowhere you have this insane romance between our main character, who I loved. She's called Cinnamon, that was very funny, but she accidentally saves a demon. It's the same kind of premise where he needs her help and she needs to help him. I don't even remember the details of the plot, but that is, they go on a journey together, and then there are a lot of random, extremely romantic and smut scenes. It's like you have this fairy tale and the author was like, let's throw some smut in there. I didn't hate it. I think it was a lot of fun. Not at all memorable, and I think a bit of a hot mess. I think I listened to it in quite a short period of time because I just had so much fun with it. The world building was incredibly strong, and that is where I feel like I wanted Legends and Lattes to have that, which felt very mediocre to me when it came to world building. I know a lot of people disagree, but that was kind of my experience with it. And this just was so cozy. I've never read a book about someone whose family has a spice farm, which I found fascinating, especially because she was called Cinnamon. I think I've mentioned it in a previous vlog, but I now get arcs of audiobooks through Libro FM. But it's a book I would highly recommend and gave 4.5 stars. Again, a historical fantasy, which I am thriving on in August. This is Shield Maiden by Sharon Emmerichs. This is a retelling of the story of Beowulf, which is one of the oldest tales, or the oldest tale, I'm not entirely sure, in the English language. And I haven't read it, I haven't read a translation of it, but I did watch a video that summarized it, so I kind of could make the connections. But this is not from the perspective of Beowulf. He is a character in the story. Frida is his niece and she dreams of being a shield maiden. During a celebration for Beowulf, the clan is being attacked and Frida's skills are tested. One of the things I loved was the writing and the pacing, which was so perfect. It tied together all so well. I think the build-up was amazing. The ending contained a lot of action, which I don't usually love, but I was so incredibly invested in it. There are a few magical elements in Beowulf and they were all included and interwoven kind of in this novel as well. We have the dragon and we have like some creatures that he has killed. I really like the character of Frida. She also has a disability. I found it was very realistically described how that influenced her in doing activities, but that it didn't influence her character, which I think is quite a realistic description of disability. The romance, absolute perfection. I think it's my favorite romance of this month. This is not a romance novel, but there is a romance in this book that was just, I was so invested and I loved it so much. There is a little bit of smut in this book, which I did not expect because it read quite young. I thought I was listening to something in between adult and YA. It was very smut light. It's not very smut, but I did not expect that to be in there, but it was incredibly well done. It was very subtle and loving. And overall I just had a great adventure with this book. I don't really have anything bad to say about it because it's not incredibly memorable or incredibly, I think, innovative. It's not incredibly new. I think I've read books like this before. I'm going to stick with a 4.5. But I would definitely want to put this book on your radar if you like historical fantasy. Talking about romance, one of the last books I finished was The Love Wager by Lynn Painter. If you've seen my 30 and 30, then you know one of my favorite books of last month was Better Than the Movies, also by Lynn Painter, but this is one of her adult novels. I didn't love it as much as Better Than the Movies. This was a 4-star, but the writing was just solid. I feel like for me, with a romance, the writing just needs to be solid and I'm happy. We follow two characters, Hallie and Jack, and they have a one-night stand in the beginning of the book, and then later they meet again during a dating app and they become friends. And they make a love wager to see who finds love first. So this is a friends to lovers romance with a lot of sexual chemistry. These two were so believable in their romance and sexual chemistry. It's almost unmet. I really felt for these characters and I was like, oh my god, admit how you feel about each other because this cannot go any other way. Having said that, the characters themselves I did not like at all, and I think I do need to really like characters in a romance novel to be able to call it a new favorite or to be able to give it 5 stars. First of all, these characters are not very well developed. They don't have a lot of characteristics, and one of the strangest things is that even though they were friends, it's just banter. They don't really talk about their work. There's an instance where that's really weird, where she like later in the novel finds out what he does for a living, and I'm like, you're friends, that's weird. And they also don't really share any hobbies, which I also found strange. And Helly just feels like someone who doesn't really do a whole lot. She's not very proactive, and I don't really like characters who are not proactive. One of my pet peeves, and I think it's everyone's pet peeve, but that is that she had a lot of not like other girls energy. She's only nice to the men in her life, and her best friend is a man. And of course, her friend here is a man. She has a female roommate and a sister, and she doesn't really say any nice things about them. She just complains about them. So I didn't love that. I really like Jack much better because he was just a nicer person. I think if Helly was the kind of character that I would have really enjoyed and sympathized with, I think Lynn Painter's writing could be more of a 5-star even in an adult version. For the biggest part of the book, I thought this would be a fade to black kind of romance, but there was some spice in here, but very subtle, very much a yellow pepper. I think that's a thing, like a one pepper romance. But I actually enjoyed that more than I did, for example, the amount of smut that the other romance that I talked about, That Time I Got Drunk and Saved the Demon, which was incredibly smutty, but in a bit of a random way, and this all felt very natural. I think if you're on the fence of reading smutty romances, then Lynn Painter could be a great author for you to try. I would still recommend Better Than the Movies over this, but I think you'll have a fun time with this nonetheless, and maybe you like Helly better than I did. And if you think that was the only romance I read, you're very wrong, because historical and romance and fantasy, like, combine it in any way, and it is a comfort fun book for me. So the last romance, I think it's the last romance I read, was The Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels by India Holton, which was not necessarily what I thought it would be, but I don't think you can anticipate this book in any shape or form, because especially the fantasy element is so incredibly original. So we have our main character who lives in the Victorian era, is a historical romance, or like historical fantasy, a little bit of both. She lives together with her aunt, and they are lady pirates who don't have ships, but they have flying houses. And that is just so much fun, because they just like board their houses and fly their homes. They have battle houses as well. It pokes a lot of fun at Victorian customs, because while they are lady pirates, and they are neat ladies who really care about rules and about society, about virtue. So in some parts they are incredibly wild, and in other parts, like when it comes to murder, it's all fine, but when it comes to like your virginity and everything, they are very Victorian, and I found that was so incredibly funny. There are just a mountain of characters to love in this book. I think my favorite character was Queen Victoria, who is also a character, and just the way they like respectfully poked fun at her character. It's not at all, I think, how Victoria was. And you notice that the author India Holton knows the history and chooses to play with it. The writing had such amazing wit. I was cackling all the time while I was reading this, and it just has such a unique feel. I don't think I've read this kind of wit in any kind of way before. The plot was okay, but I think it left me a little underwhelmed. It wasn't definitely not one of the highlights for me for this book. There is a romance in this book with a enemies to lovers kind of romance. We have a main character who is like a rake, a rogue, but of course he has a heart of gold. In this setting, having a heart of gold still means that you're a pirate and you steal things and you potentially murder people. It's all fine. It has the Enola Holmes kind of vibe when it comes to wit, Victorian setting, a bit of the crime part. So yeah, this was so much fun. I gave it 4 stars, and I'm really looking forward to reading the other books in the series. I know it's not like a series where it's with the same characters, but more as a romance series is, where you have new characters. I think the second one is with witches, so that could be perfect for October. Might see if I can get it on the October TBR. Then I read the most popular book on booktube everywhere, and that is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. And I'm really happy that I read this, because I read it in a day, or better, I listened to it in a day while I was painting and doing just the core things in the house. I was motivated to keep on going with doing things in the house because I just didn't want to sit down and read because I wanted to listen to Yellowface. So I sped it up and it just blew my mind. I gave it 4.5 stars. I will really quickly tell you what it is about, but you've heard it 1,000 times before. We have an author, she's not very successful, her friend is, her friend dies and she steals her manuscript. The first person narrative in which this is told, because it's all like blows up from there, is so good. It hits so many different points that I think is only effectively possible in the first person narrative in which this is told, because she has so many thoughts, her main character, so many justifications for her actions that I think only come across if you have this kind of narrative. We get to know a lot of things and justifications that she has that you would not share with anyone. There are a lot of passive aggressive racist thoughts. There are sexist thoughts that she has, internalized sexism. It's so interesting. I think through her we also see the issue of class and how that reflects in a world that is mainly intellectual publishing. The publishing world is very much reflected as having a lot of issues, and I could understand how they would be very real and how the author would have experienced them as well, or would have seen other authors experience. Basically, plot was also amazing. I could not stop reading, had to finish it in a day because I was just waiting for this character that, oh my gosh, I hate it so much. Everyone hates her. Even though I had moments where I felt some sympathy for her, but then she would do something and it was gone. It took like 20 pages and then she would do something shitty and I was like, you are terrible. It was difficult because on the other hand, when you're reading a first person narrative, you really want them to do well in the end. You want things to resolve in their favor, but because you dislike this character so much, you really want her to pay for what she's done. So I had to finish it in a day because I had to know how it ended, could not go to sleep beforehand. And it really made me think about certain things and how representation works. A really good read, very contemporary, well written. I'm definitely going to read more by R.F. Kuang. I'm a fan. Talking about being a fan, I read the book of one of my favorite films, and that is Jane Austen Society by Karen Joy Fowler. This is a book about 6 people who do a Jane Austen book club, and we follow them when they are hosting their book club meetings. All the characters are somehow interwoven with one of the main characters of the book of Jane Austen. My favorite character was Jocelyn, who is Emma. She's also my favorite in the film. I think she has such a distinguished character. The writing was funny, had great pacing, and I just had a wonderful time reading this, where I just love being in the world. Of course, I'm familiar with the plot, although they did make some weird changes in the film. I'm not here to review the film, but one of these characters is Latina, and in the film she is white, and the things people did in 2006, it's still mind-boggling. But the book was wonderful. I think the way that Jane Austen's stories were quite subtly interwoven with this, I just loved. And one of the characters that hosted Pride and Prejudice, she did it so funnily because she doesn't really have anything in common per se with the Pride and Prejudice storyline, but then she has a conversation with someone really boring and she pretends like the storyline with Lydia Bennet and everything happened to her, but then she put it in a contemporary setting, and then later she goes to one of the other characters and she says that was quite convincing, wasn't it? I think she might be my second favorite character, but what I really liked is that all these characters really had a life of their own. There's one character I kind of dislike in the film, but I hated her here, and that is the younger character. I think she is called Allegra, and she was the kind of person who just doesn't care about other people. She's not reliable to other people, doesn't consider their feelings, and I don't think she was really meant to be written that way, but I found her quite annoying. One thing that they left out of the film, and that's again like why 2006, feminism in this book is really present and quite modern for a book that was written in 2004. There's a lot about consent and about how men view women. One of the people in the book club is a man that is kind of in love with one of the women. She's very oblivious about it. But that's a very cute romance as well. But there's one instance where he says women never like the nice guy, and then one of the female characters says, well, men who say those kind of things are not usually as nice as they think they are. Yeah, I need to get that. I like the feminist discussion in this book, but some of the language around race and disability was very dated, and I feel like it was even dated in 2004, so I didn't love that. Overall, 4-star. It's worth reading, but it's also okay to just watch the film. The only classic I attempted to read this month was Ghost Stories by M.R. James. I didn't have this one while I was 80 pages in because all the stories were just the same. And I didn't particularly love it. The only story I really liked was the first one, which was a bit of a shame. It's basically about scholars finding something gothic and mysterious and trying to investigate that. But every short story had like different layers, different characters, and I don't usually enjoy a very complex short story. I enjoy them most when they are very straightforward and I just get a very strong character development or atmosphere and it's quite singular, and these were not that. I'm going to leave it at the first few stories I read. I gave like the first story 4 stars and all the other ones 2 stars, so I didn't see any use in continuing with this book. I almost forgot to mention the fact that I read Sense and Sensibility, or read Sense and Sensibility for the 3rd time. I don't really know what to say about Sense and Sensibility. It's not my favorite Austen, but I do have a wonderful time every time I read it. I gave this 4 stars. I think it's 4 stars every time I read it. I like the characters, especially towards the ending. The way the romances are wrapped up raises a lot of questions and it's just not as satisfying as you would have it in a Pride and Prejudice or in an Emma. I really like the sisters dynamic as well, and I like the dynamic with the mother as well, but some things just don't make super sense. Like, I just talked to you about this book and they say something about sensibility that makes so much sense to me, which is that we have this man who is in his late 30s and he falls in love with a teenager, which, like, disgusting, we say it every time, but her mother is only a few years older than he is, so why does he not show interest in the mother, which would make so much more sense. I know it's like a time period thing, but still it kind of lessens my enjoyment of that book. And then I also read a comic that I actually really enjoyed, and this is a Stranger Things comic called 6, and this is set 10 years before the Netflix series, which is one of my favorite Netflix series. Boy, and I watch it when it comes out with so much enjoyment, and I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. Very short comic, but it fulfilled the magical readathon prompt, so I read it. Boy bought it when we went out book shopping. He usually brings back like a comic. It gave quite a lot of depth to the series because it's about kind of what happened before the whole 11 thing with the science part. I'm gonna be really vague about it. But yeah, there was a lot of fun. Those were all the books I read in August, so a lot of fun books, not a lot of serious things. I really want to get back into classics, but I've kind of lost my love for them in the last couple of months. Yeah, we'll see what happens with that. For now, I'm just really enjoying reading a lot of fun books. Let me know if you've read any of these books and your thoughts about them, or if you want to read any of the books that I have discussed. For now, I hope that you have a lovely, lovely day or evening, and I hope to see you in another video. Doei!